Hello and welcome. I'm so pleased tonight to introduce you to my guest. George Latimer is back with me. Most of you know George Latimer if you live in Minnesota or have lived here for a while. If you're new to our state, George was the mayor of St. Paul for 14 years, from 76 to 90, a big hunk of our history time. And since then, he's been doing all kinds of interesting things. He ran for governor in 1990. Badly, well, not badly, but he didn't win. You were the dean of the Hamlin Law School for several years. He was a special advisor to President Clinton's HUD director, Henry Cisneros. Am I pronouncing that name right?
Very well.
He's been a distinguished professor of urban studies at Macalester for years. I believe you no longer are doing that, but you're still at Macalester doing some teaching in geography and I'm sure varied related topics related to geography. He was the CEO of the National Equity Fund, which I'll let you tell us more about, but really is a wonderful fund helping with housing in our country. He's been a regent at the U. Are you still doing that, George?
No, I'm not a regent anymore, but I follow things closely, yeah.
Yes. And you also are a neutral labor arbitrator and mediator, which is kind of exciting, I bet, at times.
I really like that.
Do you like it?
Yeah, it's great work.
You'd be great at it, I bet. Well, it's wonderful to have you back. I wanted to just tell you first, congratulations. In May, I believe, this past spring, the downtown big, beautiful library was renamed the George Latimer Central Library. And I can't think of a nicer honor.
I can't either.
I mean, you must have been just kind of shocked and
I was.
Overwhelmed in a
I
way.
was. Libraries are important to all of us. And I think every person can remember a librarian sometime in their youth who was kind and opened up the possibilities of literature and history for them. And that's the way I felt about libraries. And I've been active with the Friends of the Library for 15 years in St. Paul. And it was just a great kick. And then when they announced it, only one person in my family knew about it, my daughter, Faith.
Who kept the secret.
Yeah, and she didn't tell me either. They must have known Faith pretty well. She's pretty disciplined. And so they were working on it for 6 or 7 months without my knowing it. But the most beautiful thing, and I think, Mary, you would appreciate it, was it's a great thing to have the library, but the people who were there. I looked out and I saw people I hadn't seen and I loved and knew for almost 50 years. And for them to all come for that occasion,
Show up.
that meant so much to me.
Oh, I
Yeah,
bet.
yeah.
Yeah, I bet you had a glow and walked around on a cloud for months after that.
Yeah.
Wonderful honor. You and I were just talking. There was an article in the Atlantic Monthly recently, and Ezekiel Emanuel, who is Ram's brother, one of those 3 wonderfully interesting brothers, wrote an article and talked about how he doesn't feel that he wants to live after 75, and kind of goes on about that. And I wanted to get your reaction as a man who is proudly 79 and doing so well. What did you think when you saw that? And
I thought it's a very readable article, and I take the Atlantic Monthly, so I immediately read it the day it arrived. And I used it with all of my friends to get their reactions. But I think he's a very good writer, and I think he likes to be a provocateur.
Yes, I bet
And
so.
so he framed even the title, Why I Hope to Die by the Time I'm 75. But if you read the article carefully, what he is very quick to say he's not in favor of euthanasia. He's quick to say that he's not addressing the issue of the cost that older people bear in their last years. He's just talking about productivity, and then he did a scientific review of productivity in every field, science or poetry or literature, and he came up with a conclusion that most of us lose the great creativity of our lives by the time we're in our 50s and 60s, and that's it. And then he does
So
acknowledge...
kind of a downhill
Sure,
for most people.
Exactly. And he does acknowledge that there are outliers, and he talks about the outliers. But in fairness to him, because he is not a humble man, he had just climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with his two grandsons. He is about 54, 55.
I was wondering how old he was
Yeah.
now.
And he concluded the article by saying, don't misunderstand me. I'm hoping that I myself will be an outlier. So it was kind of
That's
a cute
very
piece.
human.
But it was provocative. And there was a letter to the editor, or a small editorial, in the Minneapolis Tribune last week, in which a man, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name, a man wrote a column that basically said, do you remember his name?
Corey Franklin.
Corey Franklin.
I've got
yeah.
it here. Yeah.
I don't know Mr. Franklin, but he
No.
wrote a lovely piece, and he said that Emmanuel got it wrong. That life is more than merely a productivity scale, but it has to do with love and commitment to other people and how you can touch their lives. And he said, and that is what we can give to all of our people for many years after 75. And it's a very, especially if you're older than 75, you like to have
Right.
some
or close
encouragement.
to 75. But he also, Mr. Franklin, also did list a lot of the outliers, the exceptions, the Winston Churchills, the Ralph Rapsons,
Sure.
the people we know.
Elmer Anderson.
Elmer Anderson, right.
Tom Swain, who's my dear friend and worked for Elmer Anderson.
Right.
93.
He's 93.
Yeah.
I should get him on the show,
Yes, you
shouldn't
should.
I will do that.
He's more humble than I am, and so most people are. But so you might have trouble getting him to come on the show, but he has the most wonderful stories to tell, back from the Second World War up to the present time, and great supporter of the university and great friend of Elmer Anderson. So,
well, you certainly are not giving up work and involvement and engagement in the community. Can you picture yourself doing that, being, retired and golfing? I'm guessing not, George.
No. Yeah, each of us has to choose his own pattern and where you wish to go. But I'm not a workaholic, but I do like to work. This labor arbitration, I may have 10 or 12 cases a year, but I spend 30, they write briefs, and then you study them, and your brain is working on it. And there's always a human factor in any dispute.
Right.
And the humanity grabs you.
And the challenge
The
of
challenge to
helping
being fair.
people come to
Exactly.
some kind of agreement.
So I love that, and I love connecting with the rest of society. But you do have to recognize your energy is not what it used to be, and that kind of thing. And but that's manageable.
Well, when you think about the causes you've pushed through your life, housing and helping the inner city stay strong are right up there. And how do you think St. Paul is doing right now?
I think St. Paul is doing very well, as is Minneapolis. The key problem in both cities is a national problem, and that is we cannot overlook the huge inequality in wealth and income. And a lot of people talk about income, but wealth is also a measurement. I don't know that we all need the greatest amount of wealth, but if we have too many folks who feel as though they don't really have a chance to be full members of society, then that's very sad. We're losing the human potential of those people. And ultimately, their own unhappiness will affect all of society.
Right.
And so I think the issue of income inequality is an issue in both cities as well as in the country. But as municipalities, I think they're doing a great job. The school systems, we hear a lot about the failures, but the fact is they are grappling with and addressing the toughest issues and reaching those underprepared kids. This next couple of weeks, I'm going to go back to the Humphrey Institute and hear Art Rolnick talk about early childhood. And we know by all kinds of literature that if we can get to the babies and we get to the children with their parents early, before kindergarten, that we can reverse their productivity, reverse their capacity, make it really full opportunities in our society. And that's what we should do. And it's doable. But we have to be real about the risk that we're faced with. We are definitely facing a risk.
In Minnesota, although we're certainly one of the leading states in so many ways, I mean, we've got a lot of disparities that are not to be proud of.
Yeah, there are.
Mary Brainerd had a quote, too, in an article recently, and I wanted to just pull that out and get your comment on it. Mary Brainerd, as most of you know, is the CEO of Health Partners, and she said, "Too often people think we can only have social justice at the expense of economic growth and vitality, or economic growth and vitality at the expense of social justice." And she says, then, "I am here to tell you we need both."
That's right.
And this was in an address.
And I've read that. And
agree
Mary's,
with her, I'm
Mary's
sure?
work and life, as well as the philanthropy that goes on in Minnesota, many of them from corporate and foundations as well as individuals, really tries to blend the energy and the benefits of free enterprise with the benevolence and the sensitivity to all of the people. And yeah, I think she's absolutely right. We cannot reach all the kids we need to reach unless we're a productive society and unless we're really making profits in all of our work. And so it's a kind, I think most people know that. I don't think it's a revolutionary remark.
I think
it's
you're right.
Solid
deep down,
remark.
They know it deep down, don't they?
You bet. You bet.
But choices aren't always based on values either. You know, when you think of decisions made by our legislators, by our leaders in Congress, you know, nationally, they should be based on values, right?
Well, I don't know that I agree that they're not based on values, but they're competing values.
Well, that's yes.
And
maybe I'm thinking they're not based always on my values.
I was about
right?
to say, it may not be my value.
I need a mediator, see?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm a little more philosophical than I am frightened by the present political paralysis. Everybody likes to call it that. I think it's more present in Washington, D.C. than it is in St. Paul, Minnesota, with our state legislature and governor. But there is in the American tradition a great spirit of individualism, a great spirit of personal responsibility. And that's not chopped liver, that's important.
Right.
And there's also another stream in America and in Minnesota of community, of we're in this together, of when the farm next door burns down, then everybody comes together and they build that barn back up. So those are the two forces at work. And the people who are worried about socialism or an oppressive government, they are holding on to the idea of individualism and personal responsibility. And if we can just open that up a little bit and give people an opportunity to be responsible, to show they can be.
Yeah.
So it's a blending of that, and I think we've learned a lot. I think when I was a little kid, I went to the boys' club. Now they have boys' clubs and girls' clubs. But way back then in the 40s, you had to put 25 cents down to to be a member of the club. Well, most people, even very poor people, could get that quarter.
This is in Schenectady.
In Schenectady,
right.
New York. But it was simply a way of saying you have to have something on the table
kind of
your own.
vested interest here.
Exactly. So that coin is just a metaphor for a wonderful piece in the Tribune yesterday about a teacher who really called upon the students
I saw
to be responsible,
Yes.
and people respond to that, and kids respond to that. But you don't beat them over the head that they're unworthy because they didn't have all the benefits of perhaps a kid who came out of a middle class or a wealthier home.
The story he's telling or referring to was, I think I can tell it quickly, a boy bringing food into the classroom. It was against the rules, but the teacher let it go for a while.
Yeah.
And then one day he said, no, this is not right. Why should I let this boy eat in front of the class and be somewhat disruptive? And so he told him he couldn't do it anymore. And the boy was shocked, but he quit eating.
And it worked.
And they ended up being good friends.
That's exactly right.
So he held him to a certain standard, didn't he?
Yeah. And so I think to use rather simplistic framings, the liberals have to understand the legitimacy of the conservative desire for individual responsibility, and the conservatives have to have a little sensitivity to the reality that's the very thin line that separates those of us who are successful from those of us who are in real distress, and that we ought not pretend that it's all because we are somehow God's chosen person and that the rest of them are ill-begotten, you know. So there has to be a give and take. And I think as I meet people every day, I believe that's the spirit that we have, that
in
understanding.
Minnesota.
Exactly. And so I don't think we ought to give up on a whole population believing that we're the only ones who feel that way. I think it's a shared value.
Well, just even talking it out loud and hearing this will be helpful to some people in terms of processing. But I think we need to talk more,
Sure.
don't we?
Yeah.
You're Lebanese by ancestry. Did your folks come here as immigrants?
I'm second generation.
Okay.
Now that I'm not running for office, I have a confession. I am Lebanese and proud of it. My mother was Lebanese. My father was English. But when has anyone in the last 100 years in St. Paul run and said, I'm English?
Right. Probably not
Awful lot
too
of
often.
Irish votes I might lose if I did that. But it's, and in a way, it was a wonderful opportunity, my Scott Presbyterian grandmother was a real Puritan. My father grew up on a farm, was the only child of Anglo-Protestants that had been here for 300 some years. And my mother was a child of immigrants and came from a whole different tradition. And I think it came with my brothers and I just kind of by osmosis understood. Here
Both
are two
sides
people who come from totally different cultures, and yet we are now one. And so
that would be a very rich kind of experience.
Yeah. I actually didn't think about it much when I was a kid.
Time.
But looking back, my mother would have so many friends come. My mother had a friend who would come back. She was very successful insurance executive. But when she had 2 weeks on vacation, she'd come and spend a week in the back of my mother's store chopping celery with my mother and talking to her because my mother just was that gregarious and my father was very reserved and quite the opposite. But they're both good people.
Did they live to see you become successful?
Yes, except my mother said to me, Georgie, you're doing well. Why would you want to get into politics?
Oh.
She just couldn't.
She maybe
but they were both around when.
Afraid for you.
Yeah, I was. In '81 was when my mom passed away, and my dad in '89. But in fact, I think probably I was on your show 25 years ago.
We did do
and apparently we're going to do this every 25 years. That's wonderful.
I'm up for it if you are.
Yeah. But that culture thing,
that's...
you may want to fire something else at me, but,
No, but
I've been intrigued by this. Daniel Patrick Moynihan
Right.
gave lectures at Oxford, and then he wrote a little book based on it. And in that, it was in the 80s. And in that book, he said something that stayed with me forever. He said, the central force of conservatism is the idea that culture shapes our lives and our destiny. And he said the central fact of liberals is that public policy can make a difference in people's lives. And that merger of respecting culture and how long it takes cultures to adapt, along with the ideas of doing something as a body, as a society, as public people, to make a difference and encourage people to come across cultures. And that's really what the American dream is about, I think.
So culture on one side, policy, movement on the other.
Yeah.
And from your background personally, I mean, you've certainly kind of lived that merging, haven't you? But respect, you said respect, and maybe that's where we're not living up to what we could as people right now.
We vilify people who don't agree with us. And it's far too much congratulating ourselves, whether it's on the right or left, instead of really listening to what others may think, you know.
When you think about our upcoming presidential race, and we're taping this, I should share with you, in October of 2014. So it's a ways away, but people are certainly getting interested in talking about it. And do you have thoughts as to Hillary Clinton's probable being the candidate for the Democratic Party?
Yes, I think the country would still celebrate. It's time that we had a woman president. And whether she's a woman or a man, no one would come to the office with more experience and a richer experience than Hillary Clinton. Have I jumped on board, and am I now? No one has asked me particularly either, but I think she'd be a great candidate, and she could be a very, very good president. And naturally, I'm a Democrat, and others may feel. But there will always be a certain tension. There are several with Hillary Clinton, and one of them is we don't like dynasties in this country, although we seem to have inherited or embraced several of them. But that's kind of out there, that idea of, if her name were Smith instead of Clinton, would it be different? That's one factor. The other factor is, just as many of us think it's time we had a woman to be president, there are lots of other folks who think, that's not a good enough reason, and it isn't. But
who do you think might be the candidate for the Republicans?
I don't have the faintest idea.
I don't know that.
There are several attractive ones. I think from the standpoint of, I've paid a lot of attention to Ryan from Wisconsin, who ran as. I think there's a credibility about the man, and
he's certainly bright, isn't he?
He's plenty bright. I think Jeb Bush, everyone seems to think, if he gets over the terrible disadvantage of being the son of a president, the brother of a president, if he can somehow get over that barrier, he's very attractive. So there are plenty of good people out there. I'm not one who thinks, some people say, politics is so ugly and so paralyzed that we no longer can attract good people. I don't believe that.
I hope that's not true.
It isn't true.
I do hear people saying that, but I don't know if they're basing it on anything other than just hearsay. And
I've met with, I'm lucky, people will call me and say, I'm either going to run for something or I have just gotten elected. And I've met with young people being elected, and a wonderful young man running for the state house, David Pinto. These are great, idealistic, energetic, bright people from every walk of life, and for both parties. So I don't accept the idea that good people are turned away from politics. It's not happening.
I'm glad to hear you say that. We've got about a minute left only, but are there some things you would say to young people in particular who may be watching now and saying, I don't know if I want to get involved in the community, whether it's politics or coaching soccer, or, there's kind of an isolationism for a lot of people who just tend to their own family. Is there anything you can say that can help make people think about that decision?
I don't think there's anything that's more exciting, more rewarding, more fun than other people. And even Minnesotans are very funny. And to work with people one by one or in larger groups is fascinating and productive and finally life enhancing for yourself and for others. So I think young people get that, and they may not choose politics. They may choose
there are a lot of ways
volunteer
to be
work, all kinds of work. Yeah, exactly.
Well, you certainly are exemplifying the giving citizen and a wonderful, as some people now call you, elder statesman, but I'm going to say statesman.
Elder.
Well, we don't even need to say elder, just statesman, George, through all these wonderful years you've served. So thank you so much for coming down.
Thank you,
Mary.
Mary.
It's a joy to be with you again.
To see you again.
Thank you for being with us. I'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week.